All right. Okay, so let's get started. Welcome everyone. Good afternoon and happy Saturday. I'd like to take this time to thank everyone for joining us today at this event. Thanks for supporting our local Libertarian Party in Santa Clara County, and thank you for being curious about Bitcoin. We have a special guest who is willing to give some of this expertise on this topic. He's a native of the Bay Area and studied at UC Irvine in Southern California, and emphasized in computer science and business economics. And naturally, Bitcoin seemed like the next logical step forward in his career. He's worked at several other jobs on his career path, including developing mobile apps, working on the blockchain, working as an entrepreneur in real estate, and has his own storefront and website as well. He's prepared us a presentation and goes into why Bitcoin as a relatively new currency is important for libertarians to understand to preserve our liberties and divorce itself from central banking that has brought us nothing but monopoly over our money supply, abuse of centralized power, destruction, and endless wars. Bitcoin puts power back into the individual, and it has no owner or authority and is owned by the crowd, its users. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Gurinder Bangman.
Hey, all right, thank you. So I did my last presentation in September or October of last year, and since then, even a lot has changed. And I mean, at that time, it was at a place called Silicon Valley Code Camp, and it was just really teaching developers how to code, or what, you know, I used to teach a lot about coding. But anyways, that was a lot of what I had learned earlier on, and now there's a lot more really actually about economics and even interestingly some politics as well. And a lot of it has to do with Craig Wright, who is the creator of Bitcoin, being more public now. I'm going to just go over, not Craig Wright too much. I really want to talk about Bitcoin, but I will talk about the entire history about Bitcoin, which involves him. So you know, we'll just get started with that. And I do have a website, zeroconf.com. I'm sorry, zeroconf.io. So that just shows some of the presentations I've done where I spoke. And ZeroConf is actually something really, really important to Bitcoin that was taken away when BTC was being developed on. They removed ZeroConf, and it actually destroyed part of what Bitcoin was. But now we have it back. So let's start. Okay, so what we'll talk about today, first is we're going to go into the history of Bitcoin. That's all the way from 2008 until now. We'll then talk about Bitcoin mining, where this is the backbone of Bitcoin. This is what keeps Bitcoin secure, and this is also how people can make money in Bitcoin using infrastructure. I'll just go over that. And then we'll talk about the economics of Bitcoin, because it's not just a computer software. There's real economics and capitalism and a capitalist system that is built into Bitcoin, which is what keeps Bitcoin, which is what will keep Bitcoin the most efficient chain and the most cost-efficient chain to use than compared to any other coin out there. So, I mean, it completely obliterates like proof of stake, which is this, you know, everybody equally validates a transaction rather than having the competition in order to validate the transaction.
Proof of stake?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole, and keep it interactive. I don't want to be talking for an hour and a half, 2 hours straight, please. So ask questions in the middle of it. But what did I do? I turned it off. Okay. I think I just took it out of presentation mode. But the proof of stake right now with Bitcoin, you have a bunch of miners that are taking the transactions and then they're doing these mathematical computations and hashing them. Proof of stake is saying, okay, well, if I have, let's say there's only $100.
You may have to. Does everybody understand hashing, proof of stake?
Okay.
You might have to define some terms.
Yeah. Okay, and that's good pointing that out. So I'm going to try to keep the hashing part out, because later on what I've wrote here is that you don't need to know a lot of the stuff about mining. It's the same way we don't need to know how TCP/IP works. But I want to get as close as possible to it because it's better to understand it. What I think would be more important is to understand proof of work rather than what you have in Bitcoin is a bunch of people in competition to validate transactions that people are making on the Bitcoin network to make money. That's what proof of work does. What proof of stake says, well, everybody wants to validate transactions because they get the fees, right? When I send you money, there's a fee involved, And so what the miners want, they want all those fees. There's also something called a block reward, so I hope I'm not making it too confusing. But maybe what would be good is to hear the terminology, and later on as you hear it more and more, it will make more sense. Because when a miner finds the block, they get two fees. They get something called a block reward. So let's say I'm a miner and I got all these transactions and I found the answer, I get 12.5 Bitcoins plus all the Bitcoin fees. So I don't just make the block reward, but I get the fees as well. However, every 2 years or 4 years, I can't remember, that reward halves. So next year it's going to be 6.25, then it's going to be 3.125. And the purpose of that is, he calls it a subsidy, is because then more of the miners are going to rely on the Bitcoin transaction fees. The whole point is to focus on the Bitcoin transaction fees, not the block reward. And this is something that the BTC camp does not understand. So, but proof of stake basically says that, say if there's $100 in Bitcoin, $100 in the pot of all of Bitcoin, that if I have 50 of those proof of stake coins, then I validate 50% of all transactions. And this is basically an oligarchy, because if I have 50, I will always get 50% of the fees. I will always make more money than everybody else. There's no real competition. In a proof of work, a new engineer can come up with a new algorithm or more efficient hardware, because they're mining, remember they're doing all these calculations, they can come up with better hardware, find an investor, and then beat every other miner out there, and then become the biggest miner, which only secures the chain even further. Okay, so again, you're just going to have to hear it more and more often. It will make more sense. So then we'll just talk about what blockchain is. There's public blockchains, there's private blockchains. We'll go into the difference of why there's even talk about private blockchains, which I used to believe in as well. And then we'll talk about regulation, and then we'll talk about tokens and ICOs. If you've been in the space, or you've heard all of this talk about tokens and ICOs, and everybody's doing an ICO, we'll talk about that. And then we'll get into the public-private blockchain, so blockchain will be something else. And then we'll talk about the key metanet. This is really where everything is going. This is Craig Wright's creation, is definitely Bitcoin. It's obviously metanet. So we'll talk about what metanet is, and then some real business ideas that you can build on Bitcoin. Because right now, everybody who's building an ICO or a token on Ethereum or all of these other things, and all they've done is they've just created another coin. It's like people just creating another website in the 90s, when that really wasn't really what made a real business model. It was really we're figuring out how to use the internet to maybe improve logistics, or maybe to use the internet to, send specific data from a place to place. But it was never that I had this business and now I'm going to add a website and I will get an IPO. But that is what happened in the 90s, and it's the same thing that is happening now, where everybody has their business. Let's say they're a plumber, and they're just going to create plumber coin. And use my plumber coin, and you get 10% off. This is not a real business model, right? But this is what happened to the entire crypto world in 2017. So we'll talk about real ideas that you could actually build. And then I'll explain why there can only be one chain, because there can only be Bitcoin. Bitcoin will be the most efficient, inexpensive chain to use. And then Craig talks a lot about, he separates out a lot of anarchy from libertarianism. I think that's kind of important to bring up, and we'll explain why. So, to the history, what you have here is the white paper was actually released on Halloween of 2008. He had shared the white paper with a lot of people way before then. And so a lot of other people have different edits of the white paper. So there was a lot of people who tried to come out and saying that they were Craig Wright because they had an earlier version of the white paper. But what it was is that Craig shared this idea with plenty of people. I mean, even he was talking about 2006, 2007 is at a university. He went to a specific university just to learn about this stuff, and he talked about it. So that's 2008. We jump in 2009, and in January 3rd, the first Bitcoin block was mined. This is real history, and in that block, he referenced that this was during the financial crisis, when the European government said that they were forcing the banks to spend that money, and if the banks didn't spend that money, then the government was going to nationalize the banks. And he referenced that article in the first block, and it was meant for something. So it was him speaking at like, kind of a way saying, hey, I'm making this to prevent this whole nationalism of money. And then, so that's when he referred that. And then what happened to him is his Windows updated and all of his computers failed at the same time. And then for a week, we had people, other famous names now, come and help him, like Mike Hearn and Dave Kleiman. These were friends of his, are friends of his, and they all jumped in to help him bring that back up. Or Hal Finney, sorry, it wasn't Mike Hearn, it was Hal Finney at that time. And then in 2009, 2010, he was doing most of the mining, and he put all of those Bitcoins into a trust account, which totaled 1 million Bitcoin. And then he gets access to those Bitcoins in January 1st. So this is big, this is real. This upcoming January 1st. And then in 2010, 2011, WikiLeaks and Silk Road started taking Bitcoin, and he actually was against all of that. And then it turns out, as everybody thought that Craig Wright had actually was running away from Bitcoin, what he really did is he went off the radar to take down all of those things. So he hasn't publicly said this yet, but this is basically what we kind of understand is he probably I'll say, helped take down some sites like Silk Road and Hydra and a lot of these other black market sites. Is my guess. I'm not going to say this is what it was. It's totally my guess. And then because he wasn't there anymore, a company called Blockstream started funding all the development of BTC, and you can start getting into conspiracy mode in all of this. A lot of it is true, but I don't want to jump too far into it. But Blockstream was there. Blockstream's funded by specific people, and they all want to build something called Lightning Network, which is a side chain, which is basically saying, hey, I'm creating this product that is going to be built around Bitcoin and not on top of Bitcoin, and I'm going to get paid for it. If you go to Blockstream's site, they even show how they're going to make money out of it. So they're just trying to divert you off Bitcoin so they can make money themselves. And this continued on for a very long time. And 2013, it goes from $10 to $1,000. And then you see him at his first conference in 2014. And it's really funny because he's on this panel and nobody knows who he is. And people start talking about Bitcoin the way they think he's Bitcoin. And I remember somebody saying something, and Craig was just like looking down and just utter, just like, not defeat's the wrong word, but not like sadness of just like, what the hell are these people saying? And then he goes and says it himself, and everybody then looks at him and going, what the heck is he saying? So it was kind of cool to watch that. And then in 2015, then Gizmodo and Wired magazine wrote that he is Satoshi Nakamoto. And then after that, he never wanted to be known as Satoshi. He probably wanted to just mine those Bitcoin and keep as many as he can, but he eventually got out. I don't know what his things were, but he didn't want this. He didn't want the publicity, and then eventually he went public at the end of 2015, went on TV, and then you start seeing these massive hate campaigns against him on a lot of social media, and they're led by Blockstream. There are people like Greg Maxwell and a bunch of other people. So at this time, after Craig goes public, he then creates a company called nChain where they start patenting a lot of technology that is being built around Bitcoin. So again, you can't patent blockchain, you can't patent Bitcoin. But what he's doing is, like, right now it's very difficult for us to store our keys, our private keys. Our keys are the ways that we access our money. So think of it like your wallet. Wallets are not simple with Bitcoin right now. What he did is he started patenting things that made wallets simpler. He started patenting things that made it easier for you to store your Bitcoins without having all of these random numbers. He's made it so you can start remembering your own coins. So these are the things he started patenting, and he's got over 750 patents now. So he's smart. He stayed quiet. He didn't tell people what he was doing. He just let everybody call him a fraud. He let everybody just hate on him, and he just kept working at nChain and just kept patenting everything. And now that he's done enough, he's now going to be talking about it. So then in 2017, Bitcoin BTC added something called SegWit, segregated witness. The whole point about Bitcoin is having a chain of transactions, a chain of digital signatures, because then you can link. The whole way Bitcoin works is all of, like, this transaction linked to this transaction linked to this. It's all linked such that you break a chain in there or break a link, the entire chain is broken. So what BTC did in 2017 is add something called SegWit, which basically removed the chain of digital signatures, which was the whole essence of Bitcoin. And their purpose was, oh, it's going to increase the block size, it's going to do this and that, and it was all BS. So then, at that time, Bitcoin Cash forked away by not adding in SegWit, and that became its own chain. And then, in 2018, Bitcoin Cash added something called CTOR. They started adding something called DSV, and they added checkpoints. They started adding all of these things that's changed the protocol of what the original Bitcoin was. And then you got BSV. So BSV is Bitcoin 0.1. That's the key, because how else are you going to know what it's, but everybody's going to call their Bitcoin their own Bitcoin. And BSV is Bitcoin 0.1. It goes back to the very original. You know, and if you read his forums and his talks, in 2009, he says it himself that the Bitcoin protocol has been set in stone such that it will never have to be changed again. So even in 2009, he only released Bitcoin when he knew it was 100% perfect. It wasn't still in this changing of code mode or anything like that. So the key is that everybody else started adding their own code to it, which I talked to a few people about. Developers like to change the code and like to add things to code, even though if it doesn't make them any money, because they want to have the say that they were the person that added this code. And this is probably kind of like a sickness that's going on in the developer community when it comes to Bitcoin. So, anyways, so just Wednesday we released BTC has a cap of a megabyte per block, and before Wednesday it was 128 megabytes on Bitcoin SV, which we've done numerous times, and now on Wednesday it just got raised to 2 gigabytes, and tomorrow is a stress test. Tomorrow's going to be a pretty big day. We plan to get over 128 megabyte blocks, and then in February it's going to be completely removed. There will be no block size, and then it's ready for the world. I mean, at 2 gigabyte blocks, we're able to overcapacitate all credit card companies. So, while we don't expect it to happen right away, we expect transactions will slowly keep growing over time. So, but by February, completely removed. No more changes to Bitcoin ever again. Okay. So mining Bitcoin. So right now we use the banks to settle transactions. Bitcoin miners, they settle the transactions in Bitcoin. Right now we trust the banks. We don't have to trust the miners. Miners don't have to trust us. All they do is they gather everybody's transactions and then they order them in a sequential, chronological order. And this is where it gets technical, but I'm gonna point out later on is you don't need to understand all of it, but you hear enough terminology, you'll get it. And then what I'll do is, and then basically it's all of these computers, right? So it's all of these computers right here, gathering the whole world's transactions, ordering them in a certain way, adding something called a nonce, which is just a random number, basically, and then you apply an algorithm to it, and you get this output. And this output has to follow a certain set of rules. And if you get that output, then you have found a block in which you get to collect that block reward and all the Bitcoin fees. And then what you do is you send the same exact transactions ordering to the next miner, who then can add that same nonce and will be able to validate that that is the correct block. So it's very difficult to find a block, but it's very simple to validate the block. So when somebody else says they found a block, you can validate it. So they will eventually replacing banks is entirely correct. What it really is because you'll need banks to borrow credit. We're still going to need banks. It's just that we won't need them to settle our transactions anymore.
They'll be lenders.
I'm sorry?
They'll become lenders.
They'll be lenders, yeah. We don't have to trust them to store our gold or whatever. And it gives more privacy, actually. Right now with banks, they're going to know everything you're doing. And with Bitcoin, nobody needs to know what you're doing. So, but again, later on, it's not anonymous, it's pseudonymous.
That's true, though.
Huh?
That's true.
Yeah. So, and what you'll see is miners are actually going to be data centers. That's all they're going to be. So right now in the whole BTC world, we have this concept like we should all have nodes. Everybody needs to be a node, and it's really destructive of the entire system. It's really only miners, and they're all competing against each other because they get paid to do it. If I'm not getting paid, why would I be mining? So like that. And so they're going to become the data centers, and they will be the data centers of the world. They're going to replace Google. They're going to replace Amazon. Not Google Search, but Google Engine. They'll replace Amazon Web Services. Any hosting, cloud hosting data servers will eventually be replaced by Bitcoin. As crazy as that sounds. So, yep, miners don't discriminate against transactions. They just only determine if it's a valid transaction. They have the chain of signatures, and then they're able to validate if you have a valid transaction or not, right? Because banks are there. If I give you a false check, they'll figure it out, and then miners will know if I'm giving you a fake transaction. That's what it is. And so I think of them as like referees in franchise sports. Like I think of the players, like the football players. I think them as us. We're playing the game, and then I see miners as referees. That when I'm throwing a transaction your way, that they're going to call whether it's a valid play or not. And that is what miners are. They're like referees in a football game. And then, yeah, and then I could go further than that, but not. So it's easy to think of it like that. So yeah, again, if you're not technical, you don't need to worry too much about this here. What's going to be, I think, more valuable information will be later on. Right here, come up. Okay, so why is proof of work? So what is it? There's something called proof of work that has to do with the mining. What proof of work is again, we're trusting, right? If we don't want to trust a bank, then we need to have something that we can trust. And what we trust is work completed. So when these miners are doing these transactions, they're gonna find the solution, but it took a lot of work, right, to find that solution. So, but that proof of work took, not only because it took work, it took energy, right? These are all computers, so they use electricity. So they had paid a cost in order to work to validate that block, and then that work is easily validated. So that electricity, you start bringing in value through some of that electricity. Okay, and also their infrastructure, their hardware, how efficient is it? So that all kind of adds a value to that. So then that work can be easily validated as well. And this is proof of work. So it's really difficult to kind of explain, but everything is in there, where you get all these transactions, you do all of this work, and then you solve this problem, and then you can give it to the next miner who can validate that, and then that work has been validated, it has been settled, because everybody agrees on the work completed, and then that becomes part of the blockchain. So that you start working on the next block, but all of these blocks are linked together, so that if you try to change a transaction from earlier on, everybody will know. Everybody will know, because that work was done to find that answer. You can't just change the transaction. You'd have to redo all of that work, but not just that. If you changed a few blocks back, you're going to have to change that block. And then you're going to have to create 3 new blocks faster than all the other miners combined in order for your block to become known as the correct block, because the longest chain always wins. It's always the longest chain, because 2 miners can find a block at the same time. So then you have a chain split, and then it's competition again. Half of them will join this, half will join that, but somebody's going to find the next block first, and then it all becomes part of that, and that becomes a continuing chain. And then you could so what would happen is somebody send $1 million to somebody, a few blocks later try to change that, so that way that million was never sent, but all of the other blocks afterwards will be invalidated because of the cryptography, because of the encryption, because there was no more proof of work. The only way they could make that block valid is they'd have to accumulate basically like 80% of all the mining power, which is going to be tens of millions of dollars, to have a 1% chance to try to attack Bitcoin. That's the way that it works. So, and it's even now more extreme than that. So, more difficult. As Bitcoin grows, it becomes more and more difficult to make the Bitcoin blockchain false. Okay, any questions? Okay, so we're trusting the work. We're not trusting a bank. We're trusting the work. That's what it goes to. So we have competition amongst data centers, and this is essential to understanding why it will be Bitcoin and there will not be any other coin. And we'll go into that again later. And so now mining, a lot of people have brought up negative things about mining. So yes, we were talking about. so what you have is people are saying mining is bad for the environment because now we're propping up these data centers. They're expending a lot of energy, and they're just a waste. And this is, you will understand why this is not true when we keep talking about proof of work and why Bitcoin will be the only data center. Because if you can understand the way data centers run now and clouds run now, we have many data centers that all have some of the same information and just duplicated data that doesn't need to be there on many different servers. What you'll notice then is having Bitcoin as the global true server, the only server, the one true chain, the one true blockchain, and there will be never any other servers. This is where Bitcoin is going to go. So when you have that, you're going to have a lot less of the wasted duplicity amongst banks each having their own ledgers, right? Like even think about banks. Banks each keep a record of their own ledger, then they keep records somewhere else and then somewhere else. And instead, this will be the final ledger for the world. Okay? And let's assume that's the case. Should that then be the case, then it makes sense that it would never be bad for the environment. It would actually be good for the environment because we'd get rid of all of the banks that have their own hardware that's outdated, that's not energy efficient. Whereas instead, the miners are always constantly improving their efficiency because they want to make more money. They're going to get solar panels. They're going to buy more efficient hardware. So they will constantly improving their hardware because that fraction of a penny makes sense for them. Whereas banks don't care. So that is when we start to understand that mining is actually good for the environment. So that's what people say. And then there's this whole thing that if you're not in the crypto world, this won't really mean too much. But if you are in the crypto world, does anybody know about nodes? What the thing is going on between nodes versus miners? Okay, I'll see that. So, and then 51% attack is how you would attack Bitcoin. You'd have to have over 51% of the hashing power, which is like tens of millions of dollars. And then you would have to create a fake block, and then you'd have to then create the next fake block, and then all the other miners would have to go. It's extremely, extremely difficult to do this attack. And what it really is that it's extremely costly, like I said, tens of millions of dollars, to have less than a 1% chance to destroy the whole system, of which you have invested all your money into. And it makes no sense why anybody would spend tens of millions of dollars to try to attack the system, of which they probably have $100 million, only to then destroy the trust in the system to lose that $100 million. So you're not going to have anybody attacking its own system. That's why you'll never have that attack. Okay, so what is the blockchain? The blockchain is a single source of truth. That's it. Through encryption. It doesn't mean that everything on the blockchain is true. It just means that it was on the blockchain. It being on the blockchain was true at that time and from here on out. Because let's say I have a document, a PDF document, it's very important, and I want to ensure that it lives forever, never altered. When you upload that to the blockchain, you can validate later on whether or not you're getting the same file back. And so I put two different things there. That's going to get a bit confusing. What the blockchain does, it's proof that you uploaded or you sent a transaction at an exact time and that you were the person who did it. That is what the blockchain lets you prove. But if I upload copyrighted material of somebody else's, right, and I'm the first person to upload it, I actually uploaded somebody else's copyrighted materials to the blockchain, that doesn't mean that I, own the copyright to that. That's where law and court will still come in. However, what I can do with that is prove that if I had my own copyrighted material and that I uploaded my copyrighted material, there is proof that I uploaded that copyrighted material to the blockchain, but then it's going to be up to the courts to determine whether I'm really the rightful owner of those copyrights. So that's what the blockchain does. It's a single source of truth. And here's the other difference. If you upload information to like Amazon or Google, even they could change the data. So if I uploaded a PDF to Amazon, I don't know that somebody got hired from Amazon. I don't know somebody from Amazon changed that PDF. I'll never know. And the blockchain prevents you from changing anything ever. So that goes for everything. And so a lot of people are like, well, people are going to do dumb things on the internet. And guess what? Now there's going to be evidence that you did that. So you'd be smart enough to not do anything stupid because it's all traceable. You have
Are you okay, guys? Sir? You need help? You first.
I trip over.
Okay, that's all right. We'll get that in a second.
Ready? Yeah.
Is everything okay first?
Yeah.
I did it okay.
When I trip over.
Oh.
Are you feeling okay?
I can't hear you.
Are you feeling okay?
Yeah.
Okay. You just tripped. It wasn't.
Yeah.
It's not the word.
Although I am a bit embarrassed.
Huh?
I am a little bit embarrassed.
Don't be embarrassed. The most
normal.
important thing is your health to be okay.
You
broke two of them.
You're okay.
Yeah, I'm okay. Everything, but I'm a bit.
That's the important thing.
My dignity, I'm embarrassed.
The main important thing is I'm okay.
Well, you didn't fall, did you?
Well, he almost hit me with it.
Ready, last break?
That was nice thing. The important thing is.
Almost took you down.
Alright, so we've got some, we're gonna move this chair.
Yeah.
Let's see, wait a minute.
I think that's empty.
That was there, wasn't it? It was there before.
So you were saying something about
Yeah, well, that's,
stuff making sense. It's
something.
what I'm saying, but anyway, like
I'm good, dude.
you're getting something out of it.
It's true. Because like, mostly like, the solar people use a lot. You know, a lot of people use solar.
Hi.
Use a
Yeah.
It's kind of hypocrisy, but just oh,
Yeah, I know.
Painted or have a heart attack,
No.
so,
Not yet, although I had the living
You're
deal.
focused on saving
The what?
energy.
Living
than you're
daylight scared me.
focusing on making things
It was a pretty bad
more
fall.
inexpensively than you, because that's their business.
Yeah.
So with that system, you then have something much more efficient than what we have now.
I think I think somebody got hurt. Because the thing is, the paper money ain't gonna be worth nothing anymore. Because we're still in debt.
Right. I mean, that gets into the printing of money.
Yeah.
That's a whole different part of Bitcoin that I don't even get to in this presentation. I mean, that's the value of it being money. And that's a whole different.
Sorry.
First of all, let me dispel a myth that when we came here, that we were each gonna get a Bitcoin.
What?
That we're gonna what?
That they're each gonna get a Bitcoin.
Oh, yeah.
Just dispelling that myth.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know who.
Took somebody's napkin, so
Right. So,
Wow.
what,
Nobody got hurt.
okay. What about my napkins?
Right here.
First question is, if I'm gonna go do some work for somebody, paint somebody's house, does he have an option of paying me in Bitcoin?
Yes.
Okay.
But the question is whether. So my understanding with it would work in the United States is that I can pay you in Bitcoin, but I'd still have to provide you a receipt, and we just have to pay our taxes in the dollars. Because even if you do barter exchange, you still, like, if you get gifts, you still have to report that on your taxes technically. So you can pay people with gifts, but technically you're supposed to report it at income, I guess.
Okay, well, first of all, I don't pay taxes, so ignore that one. So, but
You and John McAfee.
Continue.
But so the idea is that the person whose house I painted would have to
At least no harm.
own some Bitcoin value.
Yeah, it's just $1. It's no different. It's just money.
Yeah.
And then he would somehow trade
Yeah, I
that
just
to
think
me.
you have it just, well, right now it's
Anybody who has an Android app, I can show you how fast it is to send money because the best apps right now are being built on Android first. They are coming on iOS. But if you have an Android app, I can show you just how fast it is for me to send you money. So
Are you using, what ticker symbol are you
it's
using?
BSV. I mean, we'll download an app called Handcash. So
Okay.
it's not, when I refer to Bitcoin, there's these ticker symbols. Remember, there was no ticker symbol when Bitcoin was first released. It was Bitcoin. It wasn't supposed to be this traded
Are
asset.
you going to get into BTC versus BSC?
It's a thing, not a business.
I could. I don't really. I have just slides that kind of just point out things here and
Okay.
there. So, but I can answer questions about that. So yeah, it'll be money. How about I just show you the example after that, and I can afterwards, and I can show you. And it's just money. It's just whether I gave you a U.S. dollar or I gave you a peso or if I gave you a rupee. You know, it's no different than any of that. Except that it's actually recorded on the blockchain forever. Whereas in cash, you wouldn't be able to record that transaction. Actually, if you went through a bank, they could even delete it for all you know. And so that's the difference is with Bitcoin, it is never deleted. It is proof that it'll always be there forever. Okay, cool. Well, thanks for that. And then, so as we discussed, Bitcoin, gee, there's two things. We've always known Bitcoin, the general public has known it, even me, as money. We thought it was only money. I'm bringing something here that is completely different, that nobody is knowing right now. This is really front of the line. And if you understand that information can be valuable, then we will start to see where the value will be in Bitcoin, because everybody is asking, what is the value of Bitcoin? If you can find value in information, then it will start to make sense where the value in Bitcoin is. And when I talk about Bitcoin, I'm talking about BSV. I'm never talking about BTC or BCH. Those are not Bitcoin in my mind. Those are just ticker symbols, and they've been hijacked by developers.
What do you think Craig owns? Does he own BSV or does he own BTC?
No, he owns all of them. See, he wins no matter what because he has the million. But his million are pre-fork BTC. They're pre-SegWit BTC.
Right, okay.
So it means he has a million BTC, a million BCH, and a million BSV.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And I even, yeah. So.
How does that work? I actually,
Okay.
or other people, I'm interested in how that works.
So what's happening is this, where this goes back to the proof of work, okay? So remember how I said that two miners can find a block at the same time? Do you remember that part?
Yeah.
So let's say you're mining, I'm mining, and then I put the transactions this way, and I've hit a nonce, and I found this many zeros. You did a completely different set. You did completely different, but you did the nonce, and you got the same zeros. So now both you and I have found a block at the same time, exact same time.
I have the longer block.
Huh?
I have the longer block.
Not yet. Right
Oh,
now.
okay.
Right now in this scenario, you and I have found the block at the exact same time. What will happen is I will get it to 50% and you will get it to 50%. And then what happens is you have a chain split. And so now you have two different chains going on. Both the same Bitcoin, but led by two different miners. Not really led, but you can say created by two different miners. So then what happens is everybody will start working on whatever block they got first. So what they think is a real Bitcoin new block. And you go through that competition again. It's whoever finds the next block first will then create the next block. It's very, very unlikely that two miners will find a block again at the exact same time. It has happened. So, but it can't keep happening. Eventually, somebody's going to have the longest chain. And everything resets to that. Now, it doesn't mean you lose half the transactions. All of those transactions are still part of the other chain. So everything is hunky-dory. Those things are ended up calling orphan blocks. So now that is an instance of a chain split and that they keep going, but eventually becomes this one chain. Now, what I'm talking about when it comes to Bitcoin, BTC, BCH, and BSV is when you add code or you change the code, now you're on two different chains. So what happened is BTC 2017 added something called SegWit. The developers added something called SegWit and confused the entire population about what its purpose was. So then they became this set of code, and then BCH had a different set of code. And you can't send this coin to this coin. You can't send BCH to BTC. And so what you had is you had a BTC with its own miners, you had BCH with its own miners. And that's how Bitcoin Cash got created. And then Bitcoin Cash added CTOR, DSV, checkpoints. They started adding all of these things. But again, but BSV didn't change anything except raising the block size.
Would BCH have had the opportunity to remain sort of BSV if they also didn't fiddle with
Yes,
things on the code?
that is what we
so
thought.
both sides basically fiddled with it, right?
Yeah.
BTC and BCH.
BCH.
So is this open source that people can just, is BSV even open source?
Mhm.
So why aren't these things called forks when people go off with their own code inserts? Is that called a fork?
Yeah.
So why would people even want to do a fork? Why do they want, why is it, I mean, even if it involves conspiracy, why, so why have these competing things right now? You know, why, you know, and what's going to stop BSV from starting to
Good point.
have, you know,
Doing the same thing.
Trojans and other
Yeah.
stuff and injection
yeah.
into it?
So there's two different reasons. The first reason to have these different codes is because first is what you and I were actually discussing a while back with you knowing somebody from Unix who liked to just change code all the time. You know, it was really about having that ability to be the person that changed the code. It
Be
was
in Wired magazine.
Yeah, it wasn't all
It was.
about making the money necessarily. It was really about getting your code there. And Craig talks about that a lot, that they just want to change the code to have that name. And then the second person type is going to be for them probably just to, they're going to say this is their unique coin, my code is there for a reason, and that's going to make our coin better, and then they're going to make more money out of that. So what happened with Bitcoin Cash, when Bitcoin Cash forked from BTC,
Or
yeah,
BTC
forked from
that.
from Bitcoin, when BTC
Yeah.
forked from, you got me.
Leaving the residual
You're right.
BCH.
Yeah, you got it. So
Okay.
when that happened, it was actually Craig Wright, Roger Ver, and Jihan Wu. And Jihan Wu was Bitmain, and Bitmain sold all the mining equipment. So you had all of the like the person who created Bitmain, and Bitmain created most of the mining equipment that we see right now. And so it was Craig, Roger, and Roger was like the first person to talk about Bitcoin. He invested a lot into Bitcoin companies. And then Jihan Wu created all of the mining stuff, all of the mining hardware. And so we thought it was all going to be Bitcoin Cash. I mean, I had a Bitcoin Cash meetup, and we're like, great, we upgraded the block size to 32 megabytes, you know, micro penny transactions. Finally, we got the Bitcoin money that we need, right? And it was great. And then we start hearing their lead developer, which is somebody named Amory Sachet, who started saying he's going to change the code for this. No, Bitcoin can't scale past 32 megabytes. We need to do something called canonical transaction ordering, where we order the transactions in a specific way and then send it off to the next miner so that they're able to validate those transactions faster. So they're doing stuff like that, where Craig says, no, you don't need to pre-order these things. In fact, it was never meant to be a perfect system, and that there's going to be some things wrong with it, but that's capitalism. So if you think about how I was talking about chain splits, where two miners find a block at the same time, and then eventually one becomes the longest chain, the other becomes orphan blocks. And what you'll hear people say is, oh, those orphan blocks, those are a waste. We need to change the code so there's no orphan blocks. That's what like Ethereum is trying to do, what they speak about. And Craig says, no, you need to have people competing and then somebody failing, and yes, there's a waste. That's the capitalist part of Bitcoin. So even though it's not going to be like what people will tell to us is perfect, is many times the intent of it. I mean, I can go on to something else called transaction malleability, where you're able to, in a sense, change the transaction before it gets to the blockchain. And BTC started saying, oh, we're fixing transaction malleability, that's why we're forking away. And it turns out that transaction malleability is actually a feature of Bitcoin, that we will now be able to stream Netflix on Bitcoin because of transaction malleability. Yet we're told by BTC that transaction malleability is an issue. So you have all of these people thinking this. That's why we have so many different versions of all of this.
What, and sorry, I don't want to keep talking, but what is going to stop what's going to keep BSV pure then?
Okay.
Because it's open, and if you don't close it up, it's gonna, a fork will happen again.
Yeah, I mean, then I feel like we could say the same thing about TCP/IP. That right now, that because if somebody changes the TCP/IP protocol, banks and governments aren't just going to jump on that new protocol,
Yeah.
because we need to keep the same infrastructure, right? If banks, they're remember how much time it took for them to get on the internet? Because they need, this is money. You need to make sure that this is solid technology before we start putting our money, customers' money, on the internet. So, and so then they won't change. If you change TCP/IP, who knows? Bitcoin, banking, internet banking could break. That's why I was saying, like, when Craig created, it's so good. Craig created he created Bitcoin mining on Windows first. And apparently a lot of people were asking him, why didn't you do it on Linux? Why did you do it on Windows? He's like, well, I want everybody to mine. I wanted, and everybody had Windows. And what happened is then Windows had this Tuesday update. It's like this majorly known Tuesday update, and all of his computers shut down because Windows updated their software. So we have to start thinking of the internet that way. If you start changing, if the TCP/IP gets upgraded, I mean, imagine how many machines will stop working. So it's the same thing with Bitcoin. We have to understand that, then we believe that. And then we also know that people won't just change to another version of it. That's why the onboarding onto BSV is just taking a while right now, but it's continuously going in the right direction. But it's going to take a while to build that trust, especially now because, you know, there's BTC, BCH, BSV, but when you see it, it makes sense. I mean, there's really nothing else to it. And by adding in all of this portion here just makes it so much more cooler. Because it would have been difficult to kind of understand this without the data portion of it. If it's just money, we might have thousands of cryptocurrencies. But now that we understand we can put data on blockchain, we want to keep it at only one blockchain. Because that is going to be the most efficient blockchain because of the competition which is created from proof of work. So you get a lot more, you're going to use Bitcoin blockchain as the new AWS, as Google engine, but you also get privacy. You don't have the privacy. If somebody is an app, the app company knows what you're doing, and Amazon knows what you're doing, and yeah, then with this, nobody knows. It's only you. You maintain your privacy. So. Oh, dude, so this is cool. So now imagine this, where, okay, right now, what is when you make a website, it's just code, and then once you make your website, how often do you change it? You're not supposed to be changing it often. You usually put it once a year, maybe you'll change it, twice a year you'll change it. You're not changing it every month. Maybe at first you are, but finally, when you get there, you want to be focusing on your business and your website, who knows how often your website changes. The point I want to make here is when you hire a domain hosting server like Wix or whatever other out there, WordPress and all of these that are there, that hosts your sites, you're usually generally, for like Wix, you're paying a subscription fee. And so you have to pay a subscription fee, but you're not changing the website, they're just hosting the website. So imagine now that when you're creating a website, simple website, and you send the code to the blockchain, now what happens is that code, that website, that JavaScript, whatever it is, resides on the blockchain. You can actually read from the blockchain. Now you can start reading websites from the blockchain. And you're not paying a subscription fee. Because you pay one time to put it on the blockchain. And then it's always there. And so you don't have to, it's never going to go anywhere. They can't remove it because it's part of the blockchain. It will always be there. So you get rid of the subscription fees. You have to pay every time you update it, but plan that out. So then you can do games. There are already games on BSV. Cool. So I'm talking about your like 90s computers games, those very simple pool games, like Mario Duck Hunt. Like simple games like those have been uploaded to BSV, and you can play them from BSV. And there's cooler things you can do with games that I'll get into later. And so then what happens, okay, well, one thing we have to understand, so you guys are not going to hear this, but I'm going to tell it to you because you'll maybe hear it later. What happens with BTC is they're like, well, everybody needs to have a copy. It needs to be decentralized. Craig talks about a lot of the word. People are misunderstanding the word decentralized. What a lot of people think in the cryptocurrency world, everybody should have a copy of the blockchain. That's decentralization because everybody, has a say, you could say, right? And what Craig is saying is not 1% of people should only have the entire blockchain. Because it is easily verifiable, you can have like mining hosts, I guess you could say, that host the entire blockchain, and then you can buy whatever you want from the blockchain from them, and then maybe like wallet companies, they will have the blockchain because they need to make sure that everything is there. But the rest of you and all of us don't need to have that, because what people will try to scare you with is say, oh, there's going to be terabyte blocks. How are you going to have terabytes at your house? You're not going to have terabytes at your house. You're never supposed to have terabytes at your house. It's the miners that will have terabytes at their data centers. And then it's all branched from there. So there's supposed to be this fear out there about, the reason BTC keeps it at a megabyte is they say because the blockchain is going to get too big. And that's the whole purpose of it. They don't believe in Murphy's Law, not Murphy's Law. They don't believe in Moore's Law, which is that technology doubles every 18 months. So they just, it's outside of their being able to think that, oh, to have technology this big, it's just too big of a number. And they're limiting themselves because of that. So again, with the blockchain, you won't have double books. Right now, when you're doing business, you have your set of books, they have their set of books. A lot of the times they're not the same. That's bad when it comes to having smooth business. And now with blockchain, the blockchain has the single source to truth of books, and you all reference to the blockchain, and then do whatever you have to do.
Sorry, does BSV also have the, what was it, 21,000 or whatever, or 21 million, the same sort
Yeah.
of limit on coins,
Yeah.
or bits, or
Yeah.
blocks, or whatever?
Number of Bitcoins?
Bitcoins, yeah.
Yeah, because it's 0.1. So it's actually going to go back to the very original of what it was. And then, because they don't want to raise the block. Oh, because Bitcoin and BTC are trying to scare us about big block sizes. They don't want to raise the blocks. And then they also are now beginning to understand that the blocks they're going to have after a certain time, there's going to be no more block rewards. So people are going to make their money through fees. You have people on the BTC side now saying that they're thinking about adding some sort of inflation to BTC. Can you believe that? That's crazy. That's what the reason it was built was to not have any inflation.
To avoid that, right?
Yeah.
Someone from the Fed got in there.
Okay, so now Bitcoin, the creator of Bitcoin, okay, a lot of what happened is it got taken over by a lot of crypto anarchists, and he never wanted that. The reason he never wanted that is because he saw the takedown of Liberty Reserve. And I don't know if anybody else who used it, because I did. I used Liberty Reserve because I was looking for an alternate source of money, being this is the new internet world. So, but he also saw the takedown of eCash, BitGold, Lightning Network, all of these. And the reason that they were taken down is because they were anonymous. That was it. And people of Liberty Reserve thought, well, okay, we got hundreds of locations all over the world, bank accounts all over the world. There's no government that could ever stop us. We're decentralized. And over 100 countries got together to take down Liberty Reserve. And Liberty Reserve actually even had, they were doing a system where they created coins and then they proved it by having the actual cash reserves. And if you hear something about Tether in the crypto world, they're trying to do the Liberty Reserve and Tether is going to crash because they're creating Tether tokens, but they don't have the actual amount of cash. Whereas here you have Liberty Reserve that actually had the amount of cash. But because 90% of it was using for human trafficking, was used for money laundering and other illegal and really bad use cases, it's going to get taken down by the government. It has happened now all over history. No anonymous coin has ever made it. So he knew that. And that's why when he was creating this, he went to university. That is why he created the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto. He was not sure if he was going to get taken down or how the government would view it. So he always wanted it to be government friendly. The other reason why is because no businesses will ever be able to use it if it's not within the law, right? Every business has to be going by the law, otherwise eventually they get taken out. Hopefully, a lot of them do. But at the same time, also for governments. I mean, if we really want this to grow, then we want governments to use this. And imagine your Federal Reserve having to, like, at first I thought this was going to completely replace Federal Reserves, and this would be the global currency, and there would be no more Federal Reserve. But countries are always going to want to have their own currency. So until we escape that thought, well, what will happen? What we think is best for society is going to be having them build their tokens actually on top of BSV, because it's going to be cheaper than them having their own Federal Reserve printing that money. It would actually be cheaper for them to build a token on the BSV, building a token, which is a collateralized asset, not this fake tokens that are there. But there's no way that's going to happen anytime soon. But that would be the ideal goal, is not here to replace it, but for the Federal Reserves to use it so that they can print as much for they want. I mean, who knows? I have some ideas, but it's the main point about this is that and Craig is working with a lot of governments to help them create this regulation, and we're seeing that happen. So it's going to get there. Any questions or comments?
I have one. How do you do a token on a token? Because I thought BSV was also
A
a
token.
token as well as the data center and the block. So how do you do why have a token
Yeah.
on a token?
Yeah.
And then also the federal, anyway. Yeah.
Okay, I can answer the first and hopefully that will answer the second. Right? We're going to tokenize assets, so like cars, houses. When we start selling property, instead of having grant deeds at the local county office, we're going to start transferring property over the blockchain. And you will represent a house by a token. Then what you can do is you can then split that token into many tokens, and you can actually then start selling that to other people as well. And you can start having securitized tokens, securitized assets, using a token built on top of Bitcoin. And that record of transfer will always stay on Bitcoin. There's no more need for this local grant deeds, no more need for local county grant deed records.
But would it have a separate name, or I mean, is it really a token, or is it just information?
I wanna kind of leave it as just thought of a token right now. I mean, I've made tokens on Ethereum, so I know exactly what it is. But it gets technical. It's just like you're just basically creating a new set of rules that have to follow the BSV rules. Okay, so I'll put it like this. I get into this later on. I see a very much similarity, as weird as it's going to sound, between the U.S. Constitution and the Bitcoin protocol. With it being that the whole Constitution is meant to never be changed unless there's these amendments. But it's this core set of rules. And then everything else is built on top of those rules. And those rules, as I understand, are supposed to be made as much free trade. It's supposed to be as least as possible rules, but solid rules to grant individual rights. And then those can never be taken away. But you can build things on top of it, whereas states start building on top of rules and regulations. And Bitcoin is the same way. You have this basic set protocol, and it will never be changed. But you can build things on top of Bitcoin that can have extra features instead of changing Bitcoin, right? That's where TCP/IP and HTTP come through. TCP/IP is this basic protocol. Then we have HTTP is how we got the internet. We didn't change TCP/IP to have the internet. We built HTTP on top of it. And then we built the secure version, HTTPS, on top of HTTP. And it's the same thing with Bitcoin. So the tokens will be a layer on top of Bitcoin that has its own set of rules. Who can you share this token with? How many times can this token be divided? How many times, how to destroy the token? So those are things you can create as a token on BSV. Yeah.
The government wanted to, not so much the government, but the bankers wanted to do the Federal Reserve, which they did in secret. The reason for that is the bankers wanted to be in control.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether they can control the Bitcoin or not.
They can't.
I hope you're right. They managed to do,
They can't. I know.
It
It was all in the Jekyll Island meeting where they all got together.
Jekyll
And they
Island,
created
yes.
the Federal Reserve because they wanted to have control. It's the Morgans and probably the Rockefellers, Carnegies, and all of them. And was the Federal Reserve. But they cannot control this.
That's good if they can.
Yes.
I hope they can. Right?
Yes.
They managed to do that.
They're going to
for
create,
pretty-
the furthest they're going to do is you're going to be creating regulations, I think. So, I mean, what they would do is, in other countries, but they can't get away with it for long, is banning Bitcoin. So that's the furthest I think the Federal Reserve will ever be able to do.
Well, it'd be good if that. Remember the used to be $20 an ounce of gold. Now it's what, 1,300, 1,400?
Yeah, the inflation.
Some number like that.
Yeah. Yep, yep.
Same gold.
So yep, it's exactly right. And so then so what I like what Craig says about this is that Bitcoin is meant to make governments honest, because you now have the single source of truth, and if we can push our government to start doing everything that they're doing on Bitcoin, on blockchain, because it's still private. It's not like things are private with the government now. WikiLeaks releases information all the time, or I don't know, but you can securely, privately encrypt data onto the blockchain, and if we can start forcing governments to do that, we add this whole new level of transparency that has never ever existed before. And so by then, if we could actually, crazy enough, it shouldn't be crazy, but get to governments to start doing money on Bitcoin, we can start to see where government is spending money. Because right now, we don't know where, we're just printing another 4 trillion right now, and we're not going to know where that money is going to go. So if we can start getting governments to use that money on Bitcoin, we then will get to see that money move from this account to that account. We probably won't know what it is unless it's publicly told to us that it's going to this department, this department. I mean, that's up to the government to tell us how much we're going to know, but did you have a question?
I was just saying, yeah, especially when debt too, 20 something.
Right. So it's not an anti-government where a lot of crypto anarchists will try to take this. Is they're going to say Bitcoin is anti-government. It's made for us to send money to each other without having the government to get involved, which I respect, but it's not. It's big. But again, it does let you have your privacy. So that's the key. It just doesn't have the anonymity there. And yeah, it's not anti-government. It's meant to make them honest because there's more transparency.
Can you explain the difference between anonymity and your privacy?
Yeah, so let's say I'm doing a business transaction with you. I can prove that afterwards. Nobody's going to know I sent you money. But let's say you and I get into a legal dispute. Then we can go to the court and I can prove that I sent that money to you. But if it was an anonymous transaction, there's no way to prove to the court that I sent that money to you. So we have to look at Bitcoin as an information ledger. The currency portion of it is that the data is I sent it from my address to your address. Then we have that Google engine, Amazon information ledger, where we start putting information on the blockchain, and that creates value as well. So the value of Bitcoin is the data within Bitcoin. Okay, tokens and ICOs. This was a huge wave in the 17s, in 2017, and it's the same. It was this thing where people started raising money with Bitcoin, which is great. But it wasn't Bitcoin. They were doing this on something called Ethereum, and then what Ethereum let you do is it let you raise money very easily. And people just started saying, oh, I'm going to create this. They wrote it on a paper. They made a white paper. They wrote it. I'm going to build this. It's going to this. Put it on the internet. Send money to this address, and you'll get a portion of my tokens. And then I'm going to create that product. And then your tokens are going to be worth so much. And Craig will always refer back to the 90s where there was these, I mean, I don't even remember them, but maybe you know, where there was these things called web IPOs, that people would create IPOs on the internet through the web, and you would send money to them, and then you get an IPO stock, you get a stock. So those apparently were all scams. And so what you had was people who just had the regular business, maybe it was like, let's just say a plumber, would then just make a website and then get an IPO for that, which makes no sense. There's no real business there. So now what you have here is people writing white papers saying they're going to create this, which then they say, send me money, of which we're going to see them fail within the next few years because those products will never get created. And even if they did get created, which is going to be a very small amount of them, they will still run more efficiently on BSV than any other coin. So you know, I'm gonna go over what are real business ideas, because I just took out 90% of ideas out there. So I will show what the other ideas are. But you have the same thing going on in the 90s. In the 90s, you added .com and you got your IPO. And in the 90s, you create a token and you get your ICO. So ICO stands for Initial Coin Offering. It's just a knockoff of an IPO, trying to get around the regulation. So anyways, yeah, so that's what that was. It's just added .com, and then here's we're adding creating a token. So they were similar. Okay. Any questions? And they're securities, actually. A lot of these IPOs or ICOs, they're actually securities. When it comes into the SEC regulation, they are actually securities. And a lot of them will say they're these utility tokens, and will try to come up with all of these other things. But a lot of them, they're actually securities. So now we're going to talk about public and private blockchains, because I'm not sure how many of you have heard about private blockchains. Okay. So we all see Bitcoin. Now what people started doing, and it was part of it is actually Linux Foundation started creating their own versions of blockchains. And what they said is, hey, look, that's a public blockchain. There's mining, it's inefficient, and that's publicly out there. Let's create a blockchain that's private within our company and just to other companies, and we'll just have our own private blockchain. So this is what happened afterwards. Linux created it, and they created fairly good service, but they're completely removing the proof of work. And what you're going to have is a waste again. It's actually going to be more efficient than the current systems that they have, which is their independent servers, talking to somebody else's server, but translated through a different server, and then we all have the same idea but have different books, and it's all different. What private blockchains are going to do is, okay, now we're all on the same blockchain. It's not for the rest of the world, but we have our own blockchain, and it's going to be more efficient than the system that they already have, but it's never going to be as efficient as a public blockchain will be because of the proof of work. That is the reason why. And imagine as a company, let's say it's IBM, or let's just use banks for an example. I mean, imagine if banks didn't have to worry about hiring hardware engineers. They didn't have to worry about hiring or creating server infrastructure. The way you need to look at Bitcoin is we outsource everything. We outsource our server infrastructure to the blockchain, to Bitcoin. We don't have our own hardware anymore. We don't have our own hard disks. We don't have our own computers. We don't have any of that anymore. At our companies, all we have is a tablet, because that tablet will send that information to the Bitcoin blockchain. And the Bitcoin blockchain will worry about keeping their hardware efficient. They will worry about keeping their costs of their hardware infrastructure, because they're competing against so many others that are trying to beat them for a fraction of a penny. And so that competition will always make Bitcoin more useful, instead of these companies trying to have their own blockchain. So this is, if you hear something about private blockchains, this is what's going on. People have their own servers now. Well, why don't we create our own private blockchain, but it'll still never be as efficient as a public blockchain. So, I mean, imagine that. Why would you want to have your own hardware engineers? Why would you want to have your own server? Why not outsource all of that and focus on what your business is supposed to be doing? And you can privately store information. You only need a front end. You only need to build that front end, that browser, that tablet, that app. You only need to build that. You don't need to worry about anything else. That's what Bitcoin does. Okay, so now I'm going to get into MetaNet. MetaNet, this is Craig Wright, right here. And Craig Wright had always thought of MetaNet. He was trying to figure out how to build MetaNet. And Bitcoin is what a part of MetaNet is. And MetaNet is what I had been saying of this information, this value of information. This is what MetaNet is. And yeah, so Bitcoin was a part of helping to achieve that. Think of MetaNet as this. You're going to start understanding this in the next slide. So imagine we have what are we going to store in the blockchain? So let's say my social media, okay? So right now we start thinking of social media as like Facebook, but what we don't realize is that we're sending them all of our data. They own our data, and they get the value of our data, and then they have all of that. Imagine now with Bitcoin, what you'll do, somebody will create a protocol. It's a protocol, not an app or a business, in which you will then send your social stuff to the blockchain. And obviously the blockchain don't know what your stuff is. Nobody knows, only you. So it's not like Facebook will be able to just find your data. Once this metanet is big enough, it's going to be very difficult for anybody to know what you're doing at all until you tell them. So somebody will create a protocol, you start uploading your posts, and then what you do is you give access to companies like Facebook. You give access to other social media. So you own your data, and then you give access to other companies. And then maybe for all you know, there'll be a company that knows how to, that pays for your data, because maybe you're storing your location on the blockchain. And maybe that's valuable, they're willing to pay for. So then you can give access to them, and then they can pay you for having access to your information. This is MetaNet. This is MetaNet. And what you'll notice is it's going to change the whole thing, because what he points out a lot too is free is bad. He points out free is bad because it makes everybody, for lack of better words, like just not do anything. Everybody wants everything free. Nobody's being productive. Nobody's trying to create anything. And what you'll see right now at the internet, it's easy to search, it's free to search, and it's free to post, and it's also free to query. What you'll have with Bitcoin, you're going to pay a micro penny to post, you're going to pay a micro penny to search, you're going to pay a micro penny to pull a website as well. Right now we're used to going to websites and it being free. This is going to change all of that. You're going to pay for every step, but they're micro pennies. You won't even maybe pay a penny a week for all your queries. And that ends up being cheaper than the $50 a month or more that you're paying for your internet right now. So it's not going to replace internet. But actually it could, but that's a whole different level. Yeah.
It's a technical question.
Okay.
Your premise of MetaNet is that we can store anything up there and have data sovereignty, i.e. no one can get my data except me.
Yes.
So that kind of presupposes that on my client side, I've encrypted it, so it's a
Right.
data bundle opaque to the rest of the world.
Correct.
It doesn't have the right key.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Correct.
Okay.
And that can very much mean, though, if you lose your keys or somebody has access to your keys, they could get access to your data.
Sure.
But I want to point out that's really no different than what's going on right now. I mean,
Well, there
nobody
is
has-
one difference, is right now, if I were to encrypt a bundle and put it up there, it's an unchangeable thing sitting on the blockchain.
Mhm.
And any amount of time later, even 100 years,
Yeah.
someone might end up with my key. And they could
Yeah.
go back after the fact and unwrap my bundle.
Yes, that's always there. I guess what I'm trying to say is
Well, that's
that,
always there, but
that's a-
usually what we do is we put it on a server.
yeah.
No, just listen.
Okay.
You put it on a server, you block it with a key,
Mhm.
and then you cycle that key frequently enough
Mhm.
that someone who, for some reason, wants your data desperately, you know, even if they exhaustively key search you and finally find your key, they wouldn't be able to get it because by that time you've cycled it. This is the same idea why sometimes, you know, a bank or something will say you need to change your password every 90 days. Because even if someone manages to get some old password,
Mhm.
you've already moved on to the new password. But in your blockchain analogy, the old data can never cycle its key. The original encrypting key is the one and only key.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so I'll say this, which is the one thing that Craig has pointed out all the time when it comes to money is that the way he created Bitcoin is that every time you spend money, you also change your key every time. So what happens is your private key changes all the time. That's the way it's supposed to be. You should never be reusing the same key. Reusing the same key actually decreases security. But that's for the sending Bitcoin. That's for making a transaction. For it to reside on the server, that will need to change, right? We can agree on that. Wherever it's residing, it doesn't matter if somebody knows where it's residing, it's still encrypted. It's the key to unencrypt that, which is what needs to be recycled all the time. Now,
Yeah,
but once you
can't-
send,
you can't change
you
it.
can't change it.
Which
now,
means you can't You
You can't
change
recycle the
the
keys.
fact
out.
of what is the key that is required to unwrap.
But it would be the same thing. Like that's for you could say that for pulling the data, but that's almost the same thing when you encrypt any data, though. It's the same thing. It's always the same key when you encrypt anything.
Well, I mean, it really is. Even if I put it on a server in the current classic model,
Yeah.
the moment I'm sending it to the server,
It's-
even if it's an encrypted bundle, we can imagine some, nefarious character has grabbed a copy of that transmission
Uh huh.
and has a copy of my encrypted bundle
Right.
as I have transmitted it
Yeah.
with whatever key I had used.
Right.
And then he spends the next 20 years trying to figure out how to decrypt that.
Right.
Same deal. It could
Yeah.
happen,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
in this case, he had to be there in the moment as the transmission was occurring
Yeah.
in order to be able to have that,
This is a good point.
because it's very ephemeral.
Mm-hmm.
But here, you're talking about something that is the opposite of ephemeral. It lasts forever.
No, but
It's
nobody.
carved in stone
Okay,
with
right.
only one key.
You got to flip this around because in Bitcoin it will reside there, but nobody will know that you put it there unless you tell them that you put it there. Like nobody knows that you're sending that transaction unless you told people. So nobody will know where that's at unless you.
So, you need to educate me about something. If I do a transaction like that, and at the moment I'm the only one who knows,
Uh huh.
and then a week later someone says, hey, are you going to pay me or not? So now I need to prove that I paid them. So how do I go and reference the old transaction?
Okay, this is. I don't understand the question, but I'm going to ask for this one to be saved later.
Sure,
Does
later's
anybody
fine.
else? Does it? Is,
I'm good with later. I understand
Okay.
this is technical questions.
Yeah. Okay, so then what happens is we start storing, this is what's going to happen. We're going to start storing information that is valuable on the metanet. And what will start happening is we will start storing data that we don't want to pay for on companies that we're paying a subscription fee for. I think this is what's going to happen. This is a personal opinion. Because we're going to have data that we want immutable. We're going to pay for it. That will go on MetaMet. Then there's going to be a bunch of data that we probably don't want to pay for. We're going to look for a free service that says up to 10 gigabytes it's free. And then we're going to start using those. Then those companies are going to get overloaded. They're going to stop giving the free service. And this could be a shift in paradigm of what happens where the internet becomes the side chain. Where the internet, it's really the metanet and all the useless information that gets stored on the internet to people that give free subscriptions, and then they will. I don't know what happened. I feel like I thought of that with the internet being a side chain. So we can run websites and games on metanet. Think because this metanet is like a living thing. Imagine a game. So they're creating something called crypto fighters right now, where you have, it's like your Mortal Kombat, people are just fighting each other. Or let's think of like a MMORPG. There's character, you're building up, you get shields, you get a sword, and whatever. But imagine the world changes based upon the blockchain, because there's many factors in blockchain. So when you're mining Bitcoin, there's something called a difficulty level, okay? We don't need to get into that. But there's something called the difficulty level, which is always constantly shifting. And what you can do with MetaNet is you can make a game where let's say, bad example, but it's daylight when the difficulty level is above this, and it's night when the difficulty level is not that high. Or, characters are stronger when the difficulty level is higher. So with this, not so much randomness, but there is a randomness going on in the blockchain because the Bitcoin is this living thing that is constantly changing, that you could actually create a game that is based upon the current characteristics of Bitcoin. And you can create this really unique game that can never existed before. So, yeah, and it's the same thing with websites. I mean, you could maybe have like a website that's, dark when it's this difficulty level, and when it's bright when it's not this difficulty level. You can just create whatever you want, is the whole point, where whatever is being shown is based upon the metanet conditions. And so this is where I talked about the social media. This is where, I thought for a while, what does it matter if Facebook has my data? What is all of that? I never gave enough value to whatever I'm creating or whatever my data could be worth. And that's where Craig helped me understand that, where now I will be sending my data to Bitcoin, and that is my data, and I will be willing to sell you my data. Or that looks like a nice social networking system. let's go ahead and I'll give you access and see how it goes. And I don't like you anymore, I'm going to switch to this next social media app. And all your data goes along with you. So that's really cool. And yeah, so I mean, you're thinking about this blockchain, and then what you're doing with Bitcoin is you're just paying to change the blockchain. That's all it is. That's really it. You're just changing the blockchain, and when you change it, it's changed forever and will never, I mean, change is the wrong word. I'm using the wrong word. You're appending to the blockchain. You're appending. So you're adding to the blockchain, but you're never changing what was already there. It's called worm. This is in banking. It's write only, read many. So you write write once, not write only. Write once, read many. And that's what Bitcoin is. So there's some type of regulation called worm regulation in the financial industry. So that complies with worm. Okay, and now these are some sites you can already go check out that are basically MetaNet sites. You have bitco.media, where you can upload songs, you can upload any media files. It's generally about $1 a megabyte right now. As more miners join the system and the block sizes increases, it's going to get cheaper and cheaper. So right now, you can also go to, I've used Bitstagram a bit, and I have some really good ideas with Bitstagram. Is your Instagram. You upload your photos to there, but you have to pay about $1 a megabyte, but it's there forever. I mean, imagine where countries where there's atrocities, maybe where somebody's bribing somebody and they got that on camera, and you upload that to the blockchain, and no government official can ever have that ever removed. That is powerful stuff that can start happening. And Bitco Media could be used for, let's say you're creating songs and and you're creating music, and you just want to have a copyright of your music as you create it. You upload it to Bitcoin. This can completely. It wouldn't get rid of Copyright Office, it wouldn't get rid of Patent Office, it wouldn't get rid of these government agencies, but it gets rid of their servers. Because you're still going to need somebody to enforce stuff like copyrights, right? As we create something, we want to get our value for it. We should get our credit for it. So that's what copyright does, and Bitcoin can become the new copyright and patent, server. And that can give us more power rather than having to go through the government agencies to do that. It gives us more control. So then you can start uploading other things like PDFs and other documents. If you have documents, contracts that you have created, contracts that have been signed, you can upload that to the blockchain, and that can never ever be changed. So now, instead of websites referring to what happens when you have to create your own website? If you're getting it from Google, you have to download it from Google, and then you have to re-upload it back into Wix, and now you have a double copy of it. Where instead with Bitcoin, what you'll do, you'll upload it, let's say your photo of that guy bribing somebody, and then that is going to reside at an address, and then what you do is you always refer to that address. Every website will just refer to that address. And that also protects copyrights and all of that type of stuff as well. So what you'll have now is this single source of truth, global server, and everything just points to there. It reduces redundancy, saves cost, saves energy. So this is where I was saying about the games changing. So they can read the changes on the chain, and then games can adjust to that. You can create games like that. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, so then is real business ideas. What can you really create right now? Okay, imagine right now a lot of high-profile figures. They're getting spammed by people, and you start losing the important messages from the people that you care about you. And imagine if you had to pay if somebody had to pay to message you, where unless I make it free for you to message me, but if you're somebody I don't know, you have to pay $100 to write to me. And imagine how much spam is just gone. Because who's gonna pay? Am I gonna pay $100 to troll your socials? Somebody will, but it gets rid of.
I'm worth it. Just saying.
It's gonna get rid of all of those people that are being hired in third world countries to just create hundreds of spam accounts, and which are controlled by bots, which can be controlled by a single bot, to then just send out thousands of messages at once. That's what this can get rid of. So imagine Telegram having that. Right now, somebody can build this. I've built chat myself on Android and iOS. So there's libraries there. You just download a library, create the user interface, plug in the library, you have a chat, and then all you need to do is integrate the Bitcoin protocol, which if you go to my meetup in San Francisco, is Ryan Charles, some of the smartest minds that are working on there right now, will be happy to help you figure this out, which they've created free videos on how to actually create Bitcoin transactions using code. So you have automated Bitcoin transactions, and that's what you can do with Telegram. You would integrate that. So this can be built right now. Already something that has been built is something called Twitch, which is supposed to be the Twitter replacement on Bitcoin. So you have to pay 10 cents to make a comment, and you have to pay, you pay, depending on the comment length, it can be anything. But it costs 10 cents to comment on somebody's posts. And it costs 2 cents to post on somebody's, comment on somebody's posts, and it costs 10 cents to like the post. So what I'll do sometimes for fun is, I know there's still trolls on this thing. Well, what I'll do is I'll make intentional comments that will, I know, piss off people. And then they comment and I make money. So like...
Hang on, how do you make money?
Because they're paying to comment on my posts.
And you get the money they pay.
Yes, the Twitch gets some money, but I get most of the money. And the likes, I get most of the likes. The money from the likes. So Twitch is kind of cool. It's right now. I think it still is. It's like invite only type of thing, but it's not going to last like that forever. And then okay, so this is cool. I thought of having a graphic designer. So I never really cared about. I mean, coming from an Indian background, I mean, I was never really raised to like we would easily go to like Google and download an image even if it was somebody else's image. You know, I came from that background. But working with my graphic designer, I realize now how she cares so much about copywriting, because she spent her entire education studying how to create artwork, and then people are just pirating that right away. So that helped me create a new respect about that. And what I thought about was she could actually upload her artwork to Bitcoin. And these haven't been made yet, but if you just are willing to pay a few pennies, and I think people will be, the way that Apple got people to pay $1 per song, because before people didn't want to buy the full album, but they were willing to pay $1 to download a song. I believe people will be willing to pay a few cents to download a picture. And I think that if she or a photographer can do this, is they start uploading to Bitcoin, and then paying for their copyright, download their image. But when I download their image, I'm also paying her a penny or whatever it is for that artwork, and I'd be willing to do that. And I believe that many people would be willing to do that. So we need a Shutterstock replacement that's not Shutterstock. So, paying no subscription fees, none of that stuff. Okay, and then we have Bitstagram, which is already there. It's your Instagram, you can upload. And I thought of this kind of cool or crazy idea, which was that you have right now actually Instagram models that are using Instagram to try to create a following, and they're trying to monetize that following. And you can actually have a system where they can upload whatever they want, and they can get paid directly for it that way. And I know there's going to be a better example out there. It's just what I figured, what I guessed, what I thought for some reason. So I thought that was a really smart way, actually. Whatever artwork you have, and it's the same exact, obviously, for graphic designers if they have artwork. You wouldn't do it on Instagram, but you would do it on something else that was made that way. So the point is, you know, whether it's songs, whatever type of media it is, start uploading your creative work to the Bitcoin blockchain and get paid for it every time anybody uses it. Okay, so think of that as the blockchain as a data server. And okay, the final example is this for that, which I think is one of my favorite examples. Right now, when you're opening your garage, let's say you have an app that's opening your garage, right? When you're some people have apps now that open their garages, but when you're opening your garage, the app company and Amazon will know that you're opening your garage because you're using their app and the data goes through them. So imagine now though, if you and your garage opener, which is its own entity, is watching the blockchain and it's watching this address that only you and the garage opener know, because it's a secret between you and the garage opener. Then you send a transaction to that address. That garage opener sees that you have sent a transaction because only you would know to send a transaction to that address. And because of that, it opens the garage. Now, the app company doesn't know, and the AWS doesn't know that you've opened your garage. You've now had a level of privacy because you're not going through Amazon or the app. You're just using the blockchain. The blockchain knows, but nobody knows. Nobody knows. The blockchain sees the transaction, but doesn't discriminate. It doesn't know what you are doing. It doesn't care what you are doing. You have just opened your garage using the blockchain. That's the first cool thing about that. So having that, imagine then you're probably paying a subscription fee to that app company to maintain the servers to open your garage right now, right? If you're using an app to open your garage, that app is having servers. They have to pay for servers. Whether they're in-house servers or they're using Amazon, they're paying somebody to host those servers. So imagine if that app company goes out of business, what happens? The servers go out of business, you can't open your garage anymore. If the garage opener company goes out of business, the app or the garage opener manufacturer, if they go out of business, you would never be able to open your garage anymore because the servers aren't there anymore because the company went out of business. But if it was sent to the blockchain never goes out of business. And so you will still be able to open your garage if the app goes out of business, if the garage company goes out of business. You'll still be able to open your garage. You're not paying a subscription fee as well, and you've got your privacy. But there's a third thing I want to add. You have a question?
I do have questions. Keep going.
Okay, the third thing is this. Is that, oh man, this is that, and then, no, that was it. There was those three things. It was, first is going to be that if the company goes out of business, you still open your garage. The second was you aren't paying a subscription fee, and the third is you maintain your privacy that you didn't have. So yeah, right.
My questions, but I don't feel like asking it right now, is, are you sure about that privacy angle?
You'd have to build it in a certain way. So the garage, there'd have to, I guess, be a certain level of trust that that garage opener company didn't build in something that's reading what you're putting into it. You'd have to have that.
My question is how do I access the blockchain?
You will just need internet access.
That is the security hole I'm talking about.
Okay, maybe you add in a certain level of encryption at the client side so that when it goes through your carrier, it's still secure. You can probably do something like that. And remember that Bitcoin doesn't have to go through the internet. The Bitcoin could go through Bluetooth. It could, eventually it's going to have to get to the internet to get to everybody in the world. But you can privately do transactions without having to go through the internet as well. That is there. So when to use, that's what we're still figuring out. Okay, so again, why can there be only one chain? There can be only one chain because of, so you want to take a guess?
You're going to say efficiency.
But what's that system called? Proof of work. Because of proof of work, there will never be another better chain. It's about the competition that's creating miners fighting for micro pennies that keeps the system the cheapest system possible. So, and as more miners join, as more users join, the system just becomes stronger. It just becomes better and better. Hash rate is the amount of mining power that's going there. It's just a technical term. Makes it more secure. More join. It just becomes a circle. More miners join. More users join. More miners join. Becomes where more users join. It just becomes more and more secure. This is what I was talking about earlier, where I see the similarities between the Constitution and the White Paper, because it's not that they're the same, but I feel like they're the same systems. Like the system is the same to enable more things, where you just have this base protocol, and that other things can build on top of it. States can build on top of the Federal Reserve. The counties can build on top of the states. You have TCP/IP, and then HTTP is built on top of that. HTTPS is built on top of that. Bitcoin right now is on it, but it could be its own layer. So what you have here, maybe this not, I don't know how relevant that is here, but in the crypto world, a lot of people don't understand that because they're trying to change the Constitution. They're trying to change the White Paper. They're trying to change Bitcoin. And we're saying you don't need to change Bitcoin. You need to build something on top of Bitcoin. This is what's going on in the crypto world right now. Anybody in crypto right now that does not understand BSV does not understand this concept right here. the less rules that you have, and the more, even in a weird way, the vagueness of the rules that you have, you allow more things to happen. So, and yes, there will be some negative consequences because of that, but it's part of nature, is like what is the way I understand this.
So it looks like the Constitution, it's written and you can write it. Now, can you do this with the white paper with the Bitcoin? Similarly, like something that we can read? So those of us who don't know too much about it?
You know what? I messed up. I have this is the white paper right here.
Oh!
I forgot to give you guys these copies.
Oh, thank you.
Actually, man, it's too late now too. Here are my slides. Printed all these out.
I was gonna ask for a copy of the
Oh,
slide.
good show, Al. That was very good. Very good, Mitch. Oh, okay. Well, okay.
Here, take the white paper for this
Oh,
one.
gracious. Leave this one out. Well, at least I got.
It's okay, I just printed it out. Man, that was a great question. That was
Oh,
the
okay.
first thing I was supposed to
I would
do.
like to see something I can read.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I even thought about that.
Oh, I think that's the one.
Good, okay.
I'm not sure if it's yours.
So that right there is what Bitcoin is. It should never change beyond that.
Play with your little Becky.
Any other questions?
Oh, that's something you can read and study.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Excellent, okay.
Only 2 more slides left. We're almost there. Actually, this is the last slide. So I thought, since we're here, at the Libertarian Party, Craig talks a lot about differences. I have learned so much. Actually, I think I actually probably was an anarchist, and that Craig has gotten me away from anarchy into libertarianism. I mean, it was kind of like completely, screw the government, I don't need a government, or something like that.
Is that next door?
But going into business,
Huh? No, go
I
ahead.
have personally learned that you need to have government, because if I get into contract with somebody, that I need
You need someone to enforce
I need
it.
somebody to enforce it, and private people can be bought out, they can, all of this, I mean, it's, obviously same can happen in government, but government is much more reliable in securing contracts. So it took me a while to understand that, and now I get it.
Oh, good.
So what you have going on, now I'm going to try to explain what's kind of going on in the crypto world. There's many different cryptocurrencies out there. And even I had purchased like Monero, Dash, these are all anonymous coins. Right now, as a disclaimer, I've sold everything. I have only BSV, I don't have any other coin. But I had these coins, and as I started understanding that anonymity is never going to survive long term, that's why I got rid of them. And what you have in Lightning Network, let me try to explain what this is, as I've been saying, the bad BTC, the wrong BTC, Bitcoin is BTC. This is a ticker symbol. What they're trying to do, what Blockstream is trying to do, as I was mentioning, that are paying the developers, which is on their website, is they're trying to create something called sidechains, which is a sidechain called Lightning Network. And what they're trying to do is, I would open up a node, and then somebody else would open up a node. You and I would put our Bitcoins into our own bank account, and then if I wanted to send money from me to them, it'd have to go through all of you, and you'd each get a fraction of a payment from it. Sounds really cool, but what's going to happen then is it's only people with a lot of money that are going to, you can only send the money through people that have money, and so it's only the people that have the most money are going to make the most money. But really what's going to happen is those transactions routing through everybody were not recorded on Bitcoin. So they will get lost eventually, because when somebody goes offline and loses their database, then all of those transactions are gone. Whereas that would have been stored on Bitcoin forever. So this is what Blockstream is trying to do, and Craig is very adamant about this. He starts calling BTC crime coin, he starts calling it anonymous coin, because of Liberty Reserve. I mean, some of the money sent through there was all illegal, all of it, except for the Ponzi schemes, which were illegal as well. That's where I lost money too, the Ponzi schemes. You put in this much and you get that much. It's nice. It sounds nice. So, but if you did that on Bitcoin, all of the money's traceable, and eventually, if you can find out who sent out what money with enough of computer work, you can then find out who was creating that Ponzi scheme, where you couldn't do it on Liberty Reserve. So. Yeah, I mean, that's his main thing here, is about everything working with the government. It's not we don't want to start associating him completely with a lot of things, but he, you know, believes in freedom and having a government, but obviously minimizing it as much as possible, and he wants to have a money that's out of their control. Yeah.
Was the Liberty Reserve, was that the one, I know, a private guy, but he actually talked about real silver? Was that the Liberty Reserve, or am I missing something
Not
else?
sure.
He got screwed somehow
They
by
were-
the government, but he never said it was a real coin.
He
But
was.
I think it was silver, wasn't it? I remember hearing something who got jailed for it.
Well, 3 people went to jail. It was 3 people, and they were in some Caribbean island, is where they had their banks. They thought because they're in a Caribbean island where there's no U.S. jurisdiction that they're not going to get caught. And they were distributed all over the world, the other factors, and all of them got taken down. But they claimed Liberty Reserve had actually dollars, like the way I understand it, they had the dollars to back up the amount of coins they actually created on Liberty Reserve. So, but even though then, it was still anonymous money that was going through there, which is why it was taken down.
Bless you.
So that's the main thing. He made it to build with government. So again, made to be private, but not anonymous. So nobody will know about it unless you want to prove that it actually happened. And that is it.
Oh.
Thank you, yeah.
Thank you.
Q&A? Anybody have questions? I think I can start drinking my beer now.
What does BSV stand for again?
It's Bitcoin Satoshi Vision.
Satoshi Vision.
Yeah. So it was originally obviously Bitcoin Cash at first. We actually like BSV a lot better than BCH, but